In 1952, the year of the Queen's accession, Britain's world role as a great power was slipping away fast behind her back. It had been doing this, I'd say, ever since the beginning of the war, though understandably we hadn't noticed it then because, after all, we'd stood alone and all that, and our side had won in the end. The fact that it was the Americans and the Russians who'd made our side win in the end more than ourselves had rather escaped us. By 1952, our old role had slipped away much further, though our national habit of feeling rather comfortable in old familiar attitudes meant that many people still carried on as if there were not all that great a change to be faced. After all, there was still something called the British Empire sometimes in 1952. Abroad, there was the Cold War, the period of confrontation with the Russians after the wartime alliance had broken down. The Cold War was indeed sharp as ice in 1952, and Britain seemed to have a resolute part to play.
From observation posts every 10 miles throughout the length and breadth of the land, keen eyes keep watch on the skies. 7 years ago, the Royal Observer Corps stood down after the long strain of the war. Now it's back on the job again. On the measured squares of this table, the Battle of Britain was patterned in its time. Now, in this uneasy peace, the movements of friendly aircraft are traced, for Britain must be ever on the alert.
I expect most of you know that recruits are wanted for civil defense. But do you know why? I want to tell you because it's important to you. The free nations are trying to preserve peace by building up their defenses against aggression. Civil defense is vital to that effort. By giving up 4 or 5 hours a month, or at the most 1 evening a week, you'll be doing your bit to ensure peace for yourselves and your families. Please go along and join now.
A great spiritual contest is raging. On the one side, you have the peoples, who are the inheritors of a great civilization, a civilization which derived from Greece, from Rome, and from Palestine. On the other side, you have the peoples, who willingly or unwillingly are under the domination of a new creed, a creed fanatically held by its adherents. The essentials of the beliefs of the Western world: belief in the value of the individual, acceptance of certain positive moral values, and faith in democracy. On the other side, you have the subjection of the individual to a class or to a group, a denial of absolute moral values, and a belief in the domination of the majority by a conscious minority. And there you have Russia. There is a group of states, peoples of Middle Europe, Poles, Germans, Czechs, Romanians, Hungarians, and Bulgars. The next few years may well decide whether these people are to lose all they had of Westernism and be absorbed in the Russian Communist Empire, or whether they'll regain the freedom they've lost.
From Russian-occupied Germany, 10,000 people a month were already regaining freedom the hard way of their own accord. But as the Russians began to make movement even between the German occupation zones difficult, the prospect of the West actually being able to help the rest of Eastern Europe to freedom in the next few years was fast becoming unrealistic. Russian barriers in Berlin, years later to become a wall, were in protest against the West's separate grant of sovereignty to West Germany that year. British troops, in turn, wired in a Russian radio transmitter in West Berlin. But Britain's main contribution to Western defence was through the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
That the Soviets have only themselves to thank for the creation of this North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Had the Soviet Union chosen to continue the friendship and alliance which existed during the last war and which we still would seek to have, then there would be no need for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Mr. Wyszynski, in his speech, used a phrase of which I took particular note. He talked about countries marching to victory under the communist banner. well, they're not going to march to victory over us or over our allies.
Но я спрашиваю, Конгресс-то согласен с этими мнениями? И вы, как конгрессмен, согласны с этим мнением? И Борис согласен с этим мнением?
Britain revived the Home Guard, Captain Mannering's and Sergeant Wilson's back in business.
Why worry? Why worry? Worry gets you nowhere at all.
Reservists were called up for training.
When the sky is darkest, never despair. Find that silver lining, for there's always one there. For why worry?
1 minute to go. Slowly, the seconds tick away. Thousands of tons of water, mud and sand blackened the gigantic fireball. Like a huge boiling cauldron, the cloud billowed upwards to a height of 10,000 feet within 2 minutes. Somewhere out there, the ship carrying the weapon had been vaporized. Smoke rose higher and higher, the strong wind twisting and sprawling it until it was a mile wide at its center and about 2.5 miles high. To Dr. Penny and his team, great credit is due for this mighty British achievement. The spectacular success of the operation furthers our hopes of peace, for it seems that by the possession of such deadly weapons, peace can be maintained in this troubled world.
Peace was not being maintained. A hot war was going on and Britain involved.
In Korea, men of the Welsh Regiment, together with Taffy and Goat Major Williams, draw their leeks in honor of St. David's Day. That ought to keep the Reds away.
More than that was needed, as testified by UN Secretary-General Trygve Lie.
The valor and distinction of the British and Commonwealth forces in Korea have been a particular source of gratification to all believers in peace and freedom. The sacrifices of these men have been great and the proportionate casualties heavy.
Proportionate. American dead so far 20,000, British 500.
Even as Trygve Lie speaks in New York, in Korea, the bloody war goes on. Battle-weary Marines are making a fierce bid to win back a strategic ridge lost to the Reds on the Western Front. Amid the bursting shells, Leathernecks duck forward, guns blazing at the desperate dug-in enemy. A Red bunker is raked by volley after volley of machine gun, artillery, and mortar fire, but still holds out. A Marine using a flamethrower burns his way toward the bunker. Finally forced out, a Red soldier attempts to flee but is captured.
The aerial war reached a climax this year with heavy bombing of North Korean cities by the Americans, which drew some left-wing British protests. Truce talks between American and other UN delegates and the North Korean invaders of the South and their Chinese allies were bogged down to the accompaniment of much sulking in tents.
As truce talks drag on, it's war for both sides in Korea as Reds build up strong positions and United Nations forces knock them down. From the air, aircraft keep up the pressure on communications and other military objectives. But for this constant watchfulness, if the truce talks broke down completely, the United Nations would face disaster in Korea.
United Nations planes scorch an enemy ridge position with flaming napalm. Next, tanks join the assault as UN artillery fire hammers the dug-in communists and infantrymen start up the ridge. An enemy mortar hit scatters the struggling GIs in a grim flash of the cost of war.
The cost of that war was something pretty distant from the British people of the day.
The romance of the year. Mr. and Mrs. Churchill are on their way to the wedding of Anthony Eden and the Premier's niece, Clarissa Spencer Churchill. And here's the bride. She's wearing an orchid pink dress. It's silk shantung with a large spray of orchids instead of a bouquet. At Caxton Hall, where they'll be married, the groom has already arrived, wearing a navy blue suit with a grey tie, a white carnation, and carrying the famous Homburg hat. Mr. Eden faces the barrage of cameras. And if you want proof of the gaiety and joy of this occasion for us all, just listen to the crowd.
Another wedding that year, a first, so to speak.
19-year-old Elizabeth Taylor arrives for her wedding to Michael Wilding. Overboard went all the plans for a quiet wedding. Somehow the news leaked out. And here they are, 39-year-old Michael Wilding and his bride. Michael's rung the bell often with his British pictures, and he's one of our most popular screen stars. His romance with Elizabeth Taylor had all fans really excited.
If you didn't look too far, there really didn't seem all that much to worry about in Britain that summer.
Why worry? Why worry? Worry gets you nowhere at all. When the sky is darkest, never despair. Find that silver lining, for there's always one there. For why worry? Why worry? Everything may be okay. Though you think that trouble's lying ahead, just forget to worry, count your blessings instead.
One reason for Britain still sitting quite comfortably was the notion of the Commonwealth's mutual support, enabling world problems to be faced as part of a bloc, even though new countries in the empire were getting independence. There'd been a shock, though, when, under the last Labour government, the Persians had nationalised the Anglo-Iranian oil fields at Abadan.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have had one heavy loss, which I think might have been avoided by courage and firmness. We have been robbed by violence of the Persian oil industry, which we created, and from which Persia had derived such great benefit and could derive even greater benefit.
May I ask what you were doing in Abadan?
I was running all the mechanical equipment operating in the whole of Abadan areas and South Kurdistan.
How long have you been out there, sir?
Well, I've been out in my last period 2 years.
I see, but you've been out there a long time altogether, haven't you?
Well, I've been in actually Iraq and Persia for the last 31 years.
Oh, well, now you're just the man I want, because I'd like to know what you think about this evacuation, the sudden evacuation.
Well, I think it's rather a pity. One of the reasons is that the Persians cannot run their refinery, all their oil distribution without British technicians at all.
You're quite certain about that, are you?
Oh, I'm absolutely certain. On a 100% basis, it's just impossible.
Old imperial attitudes died hard. We still occupied the canal zone of Egypt on the grounds that the Egyptians couldn't run the canal. When the Egyptian government tore up the treaty by which we were there, but we stayed nevertheless, we took on Egyptian nationalist guerrillas as if they were the intruders.
Near Abbaswar, men of the 16th Independent Parachute Brigade, in a lightning raid, sealed off 2 villages from which Egyptian guerrillas had bombed and sniped our men. Men are searched for concealed arms. In these raids, Egyptian police are often found. In one, the police chief himself fell into the net. Generally, terrorists enter the villages after dark and clear off before dawn. At El Rod Sultan, it's the first East Lancs doing the winkling out. The men are rounded up and intelligence officers check them against a rogues gallery in search for known leaders. Here's one suspect held for further questioning with 2 others.
Elsewhere, we were even planning to consolidate our power by new constitutional schemes.
We're going to take a look at the British Empire. Some people in this country feel that we're just throwing it away, or at any rate, giving up the controls that we still exercise over the colonies far too readily. The next on the list for this treatment appears to be Central Africa, where we're proposing to group together 2 of our protectorates, Northern Rhodesia and Nyasaland, with Southern Rhodesia, with the eventual aim of making the whole lot self-governing. Now, one of the strange things about this is that it's we who are insisting on this scheme, and not the Africans. Some of the Africans, in fact, have openly said that they oppose it. And what we want to find out tonight is what lies behind this apparent conflict. The Minister of State for the Colonies, Mr. Henry Hopkinson, has just been in Africa, looking over the ground and seeing for himself what people there think about it. He's just got back, and he's come here tonight and has agreed to answer our questions. It's very good of you, Mr. Hopkinson.
Well, gentlemen, for me, this is the culminating point in a tour of over 20,000 miles, including 4,000 miles in Central Africa, where I've discussed and dreamt and thought federation the entire time.
Well, I've also done a fairly long trip recently in Africa, enough to make me realize how tired you must be. Nevertheless, I'm going to start off with a question straight away. On your journey, how did you, to what extent did you find that people really are in favor of this federation?
Well, I suppose you're referring to the Africans.
Emphasis still not on the Africans.
Sir Godfrey Huggins, Prime Minister of Southern Rhodesia, inheriting the great ideas of his country's founder, stresses what the policy of federation means to Central Africa.
And if we are to create a strong, virile, progressive British state in that very large area of Africa, then federation is the only solution. It's a great and a stimulating adventure.
The notion of a strong British state in Central Africa long went down the waters of the Zambezi. In Kenya, too, we were at loggerheads with changing times.
When you consider that the people here in Kenya, the masses of the Africans here in Kenya, are probably roughly about the same stage as Great Britain was 500 years ago, we do not think that normal forms of democracy are suitable.
Troops are in the streets of Nairobi. Europeans and Africans walk in fear of the dreaded Mau Mau. For it is that band of fanatics whose bloody deeds have cast a dark shadow across the face of Kenya. Some are brought in to face justice, others are shot in fights with police and troops, but thousands more escape to continue their crusade of murder and violence.
The secret society known as Mau Mau were indeed fanatics, murderers of whites and blacks, but they were also the extremist wing of Kenya African nationalism. British and settlers acted as if both murder and nationalism could be effectively dealt with by a state of emergency which the governor proclaimed in October 1952. The campaign against the ruthless Mau Mau was itself necessarily tough and sometimes ruthless. Tens of thousands of Africans had been sworn into the Mau Mau by oaths, many in terror rather than conviction, but all were potentially dangerous. Mau Mau was in the end defeated. Many thousands of Africans were arrested and put behind barbed wire. But the British were still confused enough to imprison for Mau Mau leadership the man who, while calling for African independence, had spoken out against murder and violence, Jomo Kenyatta. He is today president of an independent Kenya. In those days, we had problems all round the globe. In the Malayan jungle, we had a different but militarily equally difficult problem, which we dealt with very successfully. British troops were fighting small but tenacious groups of mainly Chinese communist guerrillas who were trying to gain control of a Malayan federation that would one day be independent. Conditions were appalling. A cameraman sent this report.
You stop, you hack, you blunt your measure, and you move a couple of paces forward for your trouble. Here the jungle reaches the sky. A few yards in, and it obliterates the sun. The trees drop leeches. The undergrowth harbors snakes, and you can't see the terrorist until he's on you, or you on him. The man takes no chances when his route leads him across an open road. If you fire first, you live to tell the tale. That's the way they killed 6 bandits only a few days before. And so we went on, ready to fire at the first hint of movement.
The communists were totally defeated. A non-communist Malaya is now independent.
There's nothing matter with the youth of this country. What's wrong is with the fellows of my age. Now, yes, it is. If you take the young man of today and you give him a decent job and explain to him why he's doing it and give him a little bit of reasonable leadership, I think you'll get the finest response that we've ever had in our history.
And that's how it could still look 25 years ago, in the year the Queen came in.
The Queen's horses, the Queen's men, march down the street and they march back again.
Few would deny that we've had as fine a monarch for her time as any in our history. But behind the traditional trappings, the sort of response Field Marshal Slim was looking for has hardly been there.
The Queen's horses and the Queen's men.
No need to regret the passing of that enfeebled sense of imperial greatness on which in 1952 we were still trying to subsist too long. Much good as well as much not so good has come about in the course of the Queen's reign. What seems lacking now, whether the fault of leadership or those led, is a sense of direction, the prospect of any new stature to replace the imperial greatness which history took away. Perhaps such new Elizabethan stature will be something to celebrate at the end of the next 25 years, if mankind allows itself a next 25 years. In 1952, they tried to look ahead a bit too.
Good evening. Once again, a year's passing into history, and before it quite goes, we thought we'd try and see where it's going to fit into history. What sort of a year will 1952 look like in the history books 100 years from now or 50 years from now? The question obviously can't be answered absolutely definitely, but we've had the great good fortune to have here this evening one of our most interesting, provocative thinkers of the whole of our times.
I'm going to ask you the first question, Lord Russell, and what I would like to know is how you feel about 1952. I mean, how does it compare in your view? Is the world a better place than it was, say, in your early manhood in 1902?
Oh, certainly not. Oh, certainly not. No, the world has been going steadily downhill since 1914, and I don't see that it's reached the bottom yet.
Yes, but the future, surely, we're on the verge of the most marvelous possibilities of atomic energy and the jet age and all those things that imply it may be a marvelous 25 years for the whole of mankind.
I don't see the faintest evidence that any one of these things is going to increase human happiness. Absolutely no evidence. They'll enable you to say, oh and ah, and how marvelous, and that's all.